Hey everybody, welcome back to Men Need to Be Heard. It's Dan, back with another show, and I got a terrific guest for you today, and it's one that I just actually started talking to not too long ago. He put up what I'm going to already call the post of 2024. And as we're recording this, it's in January. It's that good. We're going to get into that and some of the other work he's done. He's produced a film about false allegations. We're going to talk a bit about that. Enough of that. Let's get him on. So, hello, this is Patrick Graham. Hello, Patrick.
Hi there, Dan, and everybody watching. Good to be here.
Thank you for coming on. Like I said, I am super excited about this. Before we get into it, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, Patrick?
Okay, well, if we go back far enough, I'm a vicar's son from home counties in Britain, and grew up with a very odd and interesting lifestyle with all sorts of multicultural influences. And then in my later life, I was in the film business for a while as a sound recordist, then went into social work following a mental health experience that made me realize I didn't want to be in the film business. And community development first and foremost. And during that time in community development, I did a lot of work with support groups of one form or another, including men who were domestically abused. One group we set up. And then come 2016, the sky fell in, which was when myself and 4 other men were arrested simultaneously in this great big Operation Violet Oak, which I called Violent Joke a lot of the time, and it screwed my head up. But we were taken in, driven into Cardiff and put in holding cells, all your suicide materials taken off you and your wallets and everything. And it's all pretty scary when you don't even know what it's for. They didn't tell us; just said it was a sexual offence.
That's all you knew at that point?
Yeah, they didn't tell us and that was 8 in the morning.
Wow.
And then they didn't start interviewing me until 3 in the afternoon. So
you're sitting there for 7-ish hours, give or take. No idea why you've been arrested.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but wow.
Yeah, it was a wow to me, I can tell you.
Yeah.
I've had some pretty weird experiences in my life, but that was possibly the worst in terms of the build-up of tension about what the hell, what's going on, this is, and here I am with all the forces of the state are clearly after me. So you feel like Franz Kafka character. Mm-hmm. It's pretty horrendous. But then eventually they did interview and they did kind of reveal, and I finally clocked that the person they were talking about was the daughter of a woman who used to work for me. And that was my only connection. I saw her once or twice with her mother, either at the context of a work thing or actually at her father's funeral, which I went to because that's what we do when in work colleagues, you go to every funeral that every work colleague is going to virtually. In Wales, we do that. And I hardly ever spoke to her. I was just like, hi, how are you? And I had no idea at first what on earth she could be making up these incredibly crazy stories of sex parties where she was paraded naked on a table and I was supposed to have digitally raped her and stuff. And it was all, why would she invent this?
Wow.
And then eventually I sussed with some of the documentation that we eventually got, where the police released the evidence that they have to the defense, that she'd wanted her mother on board with the case, supporting her. And she thought the best way of doing that was by getting me as one of the accused, because then she thought she'd get her mother's sympathy because she knew her mother didn't like me and I didn't like her either. She's the worst worker I ever had to manage.
Oh, man.
But yeah, so that's when it really got serious. And then it went to charge after a year on bail. And then we were heading for potentially 8 years in prison for me, for this fictional offense, because this business about guys who disproved their case because they were in another country when the event happened,
Mm-hmm.
which throws it out immediately. Well, she didn't know exactly when this occurs, but it was sometime in a 6-year period.
So she couldn't even name a date or anything?
No.
Oh
I find it hard to believe that the police didn't even think that it might be worth nailing that down a little.
I would say that's probably a pretty important thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the irony was, when she was saying it all happened was when I just got married,
Oh.
and I had two kids in very quick succession, and I was being a part-time dad as well, because both my wife and I worked part-time, and we both alternated childcare. And come the weekends, we collapsed at home with the kids. We didn't go to parties at all for about 6 years.
Mm.
So I knew that, and my friends knew. I mean, by this time I was divorced from her, and in fact she'd already died by the time the case was sent to bail.
Oh,
But
sorry.
I'd remarried, and my wife had no hesitation in believing me, which is good, because I know that some people, some women particularly, their solidarity lies with other women before even their partners sometimes.
Oh, it's very common for a divorce to happen when an accusation's made like that,
Yeah.
or family in general. I've talked
Yeah.
about it many times on the show before. I've had guys on, and literally everyone bails on them: friends, family, co-workers, and they end up alone. So at least you had your wife standing by you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then we went through that whole business, speaking to lawyers, and then when we were charged, I decided I was going to tell my family. I was going to talk about it. Best move I ever made, by the way, because while I was holding it all in, my wife Katrina and I were just not telling anybody. That caused so much internal pressure, bad dreams and worries, all those things, that when I told everybody, it was such a relief to be able to talk about it and have people say, well, that's obvious bullshit from just what you're showing us and telling us. It must never happen. But we got all the way to the week before the trial. We'd been in court for pre-trial hearings and found out that the detective involved had sent all these emails to and from the complainant that were all very personal.
Uh-oh.
And very, began with, "Hi, hun," smiley face. This is your main witness you're talking to.
Wait a minute. This is the police officer in charge of the investigation.
Yeah.
In a matter of speaking, having a relationship with the person that's part of the investigation.
You got it.
Continue on, my friend. I'm just shaking my head.
I've come across other cases where the relationships are more relationship.
I'm aware of some myself. Yep.
Yeah. So, but when we pointed this out to the judge gave a look of, this is not good, and it was pretty soon that one of our lawyers wrote a pretty damning 2-page letter detailing, all trawled from the evidence that the police some of them hadn't looked at, that showed that she'd totaled 11 false accusations in her life. One when she was 15 to the same police force. Another one in Manchester, another one elsewhere, another one against a lesbian partner she'd had. I mean, it was a disease she had, it almost seemed like.
It's funny you bring that up, Patrick, because I've heard that before myself. I actually, there's a psychologist I've been talking to that believes the same as you, that it is a disease. It's a mental illness. Hopefully I can get him to come on the show and discuss it. He's a little leery of doing it because it's a little out there from the psychological perspective, but it's a very common thing that they'll find multiple people have been accused by the person making the accusation. Yeah. And
it seems that she's determined to believe the lie. It doesn't let her off the hook, by by the way.
Mhm.
Some people seem to think that having mental health problems, which I've had and many people have had, it doesn't let you off the hook. It doesn't mean that you're not responsible for what your actions are.
Right.
It can do in extreme psychosis, I'm sure, but it's generally speaking, people know what they're doing. They just constructed a lie around that. And anyone can believe a lie or be made to believe a lie if they're told it often enough, and if they tell themselves it often enough.
And that's what happens is they actually do believe it happened because
Yeah.
that's what they're doing day after day, night after night, is saying this happened to me, and it just becomes so ingrained. They literally they could pass a lie detector test because they believe
Yeah.
it so
They did
well.
this with you may have heard about it. They did an experiment in America with the students being told by their mothers that they walked into a glass door
Yes, I'm
when
familiar with
3
it. Yep.
years old. Yeah, you know
Yeah.
that's one.
Yep.
And then somebody else told them that, and then later they're telling everybody they're absolutely sure that they walked into a glass door, and their mums then say, "No, I made that up," and they still believe it.
Yep. 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 So you never went to trial? It sounded like you said a week
Not to
before.
actual trial. No,
Okay.
we it was once the CPS got this letter from the lawyers, which said that not only is this obvious abusive process, but we're going to sue your asses as well as everybody else's after this is done, because this is going to be a really scandalous story of the prosecution and the police failing hugely to look at evidence properly and pursuing innocent men. And the CPS went, "Oh, don't think we will do that." So they dropped it all. But of course, that isn't the end of the story for us five guys. It really, in many ways, it was great relief. And I'm glad I'm not in jail, because I still would be, by the way, coming up for release this year. It just doesn't seem the 8 years.
Yeah, I mean you've got to look back at the last 8 years of your life and appreciate every moment of them, because had her allegation stuck, you would have lost those 8 years, that time with your children, all of that stuff. I mean,
Everything. Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough as it was, but
let me ask you a quick question, if I may. So in the States, arrest records are public record. So if an accusation's made about you and you're arrested like you were,
yeah,
if you go and Google that person, and I've had this from some of the guys that have been on the show before, it will show they were arrested, but there's never anything that says they were exonerated. I'm curious because I honestly don't know. Is it the same in the UK? Is it a public record? And does that record get removed later on? Because in the States, it does not.
arrest is not public record.
Okay.
Not named anyway. They can publish that they've arrested a person, but until charged, they're not supposed to. Again, you've got that thing of what's written and what's actual.
Right.
Plenty of famous people get arrested and magically it all comes out. Yeah. But it is, as you rightly point out, the record that says you were charged, which is one that is public.
Mm-hmm.
If it gets as far as being charged in this country, then that is public knowledge. That's when I decided to tell my family, because I knew then it was public knowledge. But one of the best things I did was contact David Brown through a friend of a friend who was a journalist at the Times of London.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to write up the story when the case collapsed. He wrote a big piece in the Times that said, I can't remember what it was now, lies of serial fantasists revealed in paedophile case, whatever it was. And if you then Google our names, any of our names, that newspaper article comes up before anything else. So it's the story of it being dropped as ridiculous. That's what comes up. Whereas with a lot of people I talk to, if you Google their names, they get charged with or tried for. They don't get not guilty come up.
I got to be honest with you, Patrick. I think you're the first one I've ever heard that shows the exoneration first, as opposed to the charges or that you've been charged. or going to trial or whatever. So good for you. And that's the way it should be.
It's a good move. I didn't know it was such a great move at the time, but it
It
was.
was a brilliant move, obviously. And, again, part of the reason I have this show is to help guys understand that this is what you go through, and maybe give them some ideas on how to protect themselves should they have to face it. Because, as you know, most guys try and go it alone. They lose all their support systems, and it's an avalanche, and they're trying to fight, literally tons of snow coming at them, to use an analogy, and hold up their hands to try and stop it. It doesn't work for most guys. But this caused you now, so you get cleared, and I want to dive into that film you did because, as we talked about before we went on air with this, I started watching it. I had to stop because it was affecting me. Now, I've never faced a false allegation, knock on wood,
Yeah.
But it's such a powerful film, and I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes. So for those of you that want to reference it and go watch it, and I encourage everyone to, because it will blow your mind. I mean, I watched, I think it's about a half hour, give or take, long.
A half hour long, yeah.
Yeah, and I watched about 10 minutes, and I had to stop because you hear these stories and you just literally start crying for these men. Can you talk a little bit about, the whole process and all of that, just in general?
Well, because of looking for help and support when I was charged, I joined a group online, a Facebook group called accused.me, which is about 900 people strong at that time. And I became a moderator on the group because I was willing to answer questions of people who were earlier in the process and their relatives, and give out sound advice. So the guy who owned the site said, "Do you want to come and moderate with us? Because we need more people to help." And because of doing that, I got myself quite a sort of good reputation as someone that could be trusted and talked to. And when our case finally got thrown out, I threw a party where I invited all these people virtually. Come and have a big party. We're going to in Stroud, near where I lived, and we're going to just celebrate not being guilty and screw them.
Right.
And I want to make a film, and I'd like you all to be in it if possible, please. And that took off as an idea. Eventually, I had all sorts of ideas about how to go about it, but we eventually decided to do these interviews where I would be the interviewer, and a friend was a cameraman by youthful student experience. And so we joined up and we formed the plan, and we asked these people if they'd be happy to tell their story. And of course, 9 out of 10 said no. So the people we got are only a tenth of the people that I knew. Mm-hmm. Who could have told a story just as horrifying, but they couldn't face it. And I don't blame them at all. I never put pressure on anyone to come forward because I knew personally how hard it was. Mm-hmm. And so we then set up interviews at different parts of the country, all around the UK. We went as far north as Lancashire, down to Cornwall, London, Birmingham, Midlands, all around the place. So it's about the equivalent of traveling at one US state, but
yeah.
But for Brits, it's quite a long way. But so the main expenses we had were travel, because I had the video camera, and we agreed the whole deal, and we got crowdfunded a bit, and we got some other funding from FACT, Falsely Accused Carers and Teachers, another good support org in Britain. Mm-hmm. And we then got a friend of his who I hadn't met before, but who was an editor, and he edited for us, did a very good job, obviously with a lot of guidance from myself. But we tried to do a cross section of slightly different types of cases, and there are older people and there's 2 priests and a nun. We have a falsely accused nun in that film. And she's friends with the Emperor of Japan, the Queen, and 2 ex-US presidents.
It
Yeah.
just shows it can happen to anyone. And this, a
Correct.
point I try to drive home over and over again, because and I'm sure you've done this, heard this too, is the number one thing I hear from guys that have gone through false allegations is, I never thought it could happen to me. It's
Correct.
universal.
Yeah.
Yes, it can, and it usually happen out of nowhere, as happened to you.
Yeah.
And to get back to the film, it was, I believe the name's We Believe You is the name of it. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure.
We
Yeah.
believe you, which is obviously it's that structure in law that the police instituted back in, I think it was 2003 in Britain, whereby anyone who complains of rape, there's a rule that the police automatically believe. Now, the spirit of it was supposed to be that you start by not dismissing.
Mm-hmm.
That was supposed to be, but they took it much more literally and got to the point where the innocent until proven guilty ethos was thrown right out of the window. And they set about framing people like me by getting rid of any evidence that might, they actually would hide evidence that was exculpatory. And they would build up evidence that was basically the complainant had told a friend, and that friend's testimony that she told them, that was somehow evidence that it was true. And I don't quite get that. If a mafiosi had 5 uncles come to court with him and say, I've heard him tell us he never killed anybody, so therefore he didn't.
Right.
You wouldn't buy that, would you? So,
Yeah, I mean, in theory, in the United States, that would be hearsay. You can't say,
exactly.
I don't know what the laws are in the UK. I got to believe they're somewhat similar, or
They're
exactly the same.
supposed to be.
Yeah, but there's the key phrase: supposed
Yeah.
to be, right? Because again, that stuff does get in. We talk about, and maybe we can explore this a little bit. Is they meant well with these laws. I genuinely believe that. There were many times where legitimate cases were falling through the cracks, never prosecuted,
Yeah.
and they wanted to address that. Fair enough. I actually have no problem with any of that. I'm sure you don't either. But to your point, it became a presumption of guilt, not innocence.
Yeah.
And when you're investigating with that mindset, and I've talked about it many times myself, it does change the way you do the investigation. First of all, it does lead to things like exculpatory evidence suddenly poof gone. Have you heard any conversations over there, because there's nothing here, about addressing that? I'm just curious.
There's conversations between people like me online and 1 or 2 voices that are a little bit higher up, because more and more people are being accused, including a couple of MPs, for example. And the famous people, unfortunately, they tend to take the attitude that it's just because they're famous that this trouble happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And just like I would say, your point about it can happen to anyone, it's not that's not the issue. And it's not someone necessarily you had a relationship with. In my case, it's a complete stranger. One of my fellow accusees had never met this girl in his life. It was really a mistaken identity because his brother had met her. But all the accusations were from 25 years previously. Now, if you know anything about police identity parades and issues like that, you'll know that even a week after you've seen something, your memory of it is likely to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Not just possibly mistaken, but it will be wrong. Now, just imagine after 25 years, how cemented that wrong idea could be.
Well, and it goes, that's a very common thing that happens. These allegations come out years, decades later. Again, I've never had to deal with one, but I got to imagine you're sitting there being interviewed by the police, and they're sitting there going, well, in your case, they didn't use dates, but in most cases, they'll go, well, on February 3rd, 1997, blah, blah, blah. And I would be sitting there going, 1997, I don't even have a recollection of the whole year, let alone that specific time frame. And it puts the person that's been accused in a very difficult position, because if you're trying to prove it didn't happen, and let's face it, there's a presumption of guilt, so it's on you to prove it didn't happen, it makes it very difficult in every way. Plus, now you're paying lawyers God knows how much money to try and find that evidence. Because you sit there to lawyer, I never did it. Hopefully they can go find it. Can I ask you real quick? I mean, it took you over a year. There were 5 of you, is what you said?
Yeah, 5 of us
That
accused.
had to be a very expensive case for all of you.
Well, it was for my friend Steve because he was a doctor and he had some money. But for the rest of us, we were all pretty much broke. Not stony broke, but we have legal aid in this
Oh, so
country.
you got legal aid. Okay.
Yeah, so I got legal aid, but that's a mixed blessing because that when you get legal aid, you think, great, I now don't have to pay for any defense. But legal aid lawyers don't go, oh, great, we've got another legal aid case. They go, what's the minimum we can do
Yep.
to get through this case? So it's very unusual. I was lucky. I had a lawyer who was a friend from 30 years before. And I got in contact with him and he said, yeah, I'll take it. And it was on legal aid, but he actually put in a bit more effort than the average legal aid lawyer would do.
Yeah, I mean, here we have public defenders, same thing, the equivalent of legal aid.
Yeah.
But a lot of them, some of them have the best of intentions, but a lot of them don't handle these cases well. I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't want to disparage all of them, but
no, but there are some people who have been put to death because they didn't get
exactly. So after you did the film, I'm curious, what was the response that you got? Well, let me back up. Where was it shown? I obviously it's online and we'll have the link to it, but
yeah, I decided, but even back then, that the best thing to do would be just to promote it via networks of people who are interested online. I was never going to get it shown on broadcast television.
Did you try? That was one of the questions I was about to ask you.
I had experience before the film was even made or released of people like the BBC, radio, and some TV people saying they really wanted to interview me and they were so sympathetic to all this, but somehow those things never happened. Kind of suspicious, really. I mean, it's most interesting that my change included a political change because a lot of the sort of more feminist orientated things that I used to be really sympathetic with, including the liberal left media, they were all loudly saying, false accusations are vanishingly rare. We would never believe this. So the people who did believe and did interview were all right-wing or centrist type media. And recently I've done an interview with Pearl Davis. Do you know Pearly Things?
Pearly, yep, just Pearly Things,
yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I disagree with a lot of what she says. And I know that she's hooking for, she does what I call dissent storming. So she will get looks and engagement out of disagreeing with something that a lot of people wouldn't disagree with or others will. So, creating an argument.
Right.
And some of those arguments I'm not really interested in and not want to be part of, but I can't argue with 1.9 million watchers. That's more than I would ever have got on a BBC documentary.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I've tried to bring stories to the media myself, and I work in media. I mean, I do a radio show and stuff like that. And I'll be honest with you, in my case, I've noticed I've had reporters that would love to do the story many times, but then they have to go to their editor and pitch it. And that's primarily where it gets shot down. If it gets past the editor, I know of one, gung-ho to do the story. Like the reporter was all over it. She was great. Gets to the editor's like, oh, yeah. And then it went to the publisher, and the publisher said, not a chance because it's too controversial.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And that's a problem because these stories do need to get out. To be fair, though, I think they are starting to come out more and more. As I've talked about recently, there hasn't been a day since before our Thanksgiving, so roughly 2 months ago from the time we're filming this, that I haven't become aware of yet another false allegation being proven to be false. It's all literally every single day. Sometimes I'm hearing 2 or 3. Of course, my followers send them to me. But it is, you are starting to see though, and I have to be honest with you, I'm seeing it more from the UK than the US.
I think there is a change happening, and I'm pleased, obviously. But yeah, getting the film out was a big part of trying to achieve that. And I had, good allies came along and helped. Janice Fiamengo,
I don't know
probably.
that. No.
Oh, Janice is a great supporter. She's Canadian, I think. She's a professor, and she's one of the best anti-feminist female professors you could ever hope for. And then Bettina Arndt in Australia, she put my speech, the speech I gave to the International Men's Conference, she did the top and tail of it, but she put it up on her YouTube channel. It got 36,000 views in a very short time, which is more than I got from my own YouTube. And I've not been pushing it hard and fast and furious because I'm not expert in that. So if anyone else watches the film and says, man, this needs to be out there more, then please don't feel you need permission from me to copy it, mirror it, do whatever you want, download it and rebroadcast it. It's public. I don't want any copyright, any fee. It's just there for use.
And I can assure you, my friend, it'll be linked to this show, and I will be talking about it because, I mean, all kidding aside with the film, it is that powerful. As I said, it brought tears to my eyes. It's a story that needs to be told because for all the actual victims and all the suffering they go through, and I have every bit of sympathy. I am a survivor of that as well. I understand that side of it. But it's every bit as bad for someone who's been falsely accused.
Yeah.
And the one difference, and I'm not trying to say one's worse than the other, but the one difference is even when you're exonerated, there's a good portion of people that will still believe you're guilty, and you are going to deal with that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think, to me, needs to be talked about and addressed because right now, there are no laws protecting those, right? Your presumption of guilt, even when you're completely exonerated, how many celebrities out there, just to use an example. It'd be interesting, just quick side note, the Russell Brand case, right? You see what's happened to him now. To this day, as we're filming this, we don't know. He could be guilty as hell. We don't know. But there is a hell of a presumption of guilt going on. And as we're filming this, we're 4 or 5 months in? And nothing.
I know.
Which
I
has got me going, wait a minute. If they had something, they'd be putting it out there.
I'm not a fan of Russell Brand.
I'm not either, by the way.
But I really want him to come out of this with a win because I suspect, like you do, that this is yet more of that opportunistic, me too.
Yeah.
And I know there's one case that when it happened, this woman in Wales was supposed to be walking back to her home in a rural Welsh town come country road area and it was at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know that area quite well. And when she said that she was attacked by a gang of 3 masked men wearing ski masks, and the police had put out an appeal for anyone who might have seen this on CCTV. And I said, I bet we hear nothing about this ever again. And 2 years later, I then said, wonder what's going on with this. And sure enough, nothing happened. And I raised it on X. I posted about it. And the cop said, oh, well, let's see what happens. I said, no, you don't understand. This was 2.5 years ago. And I know that area. No way were there 3 men, either with or without masks, hanging around at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. They weren't there. That was bollocks. And isn't it masked men? Isn't it a lovely, convenient thing because you don't have to identify them?
Yeah.
And three of them, how often does that happen in real life? And if what does happen, doesn't it happen in the middle of a city that's up all night? This is the most rural area imaginable. And it stank of someone who'd actually been unfaithful to the partner that they had somewhere and had got up out of bed in this place at 4 a.m, feeling regretful. And on the way home realized that it was probably going to be discovered. So, hey, make up a story to cover that. That's a common.
It happens all the time, doesn't it? I mean, I know you hear the stories, and I have too. Before we move on to other topics, what would be your fix, right? How do we address the issue of false allegation while, by the way, still being respectful for those that actually have? What would be your suggestions?
It's hard because the people who really need changing, their minds changing, you can't, the whole thing about persuasion is you can't get someone to believe completely contrary to what they already believe. You've got to ease them into looking at things in a new fashion and looking at just giving them statements that make them question. And my personal favorite thing now at the moment is to try and go after the men who were like me, who were utterly sympathetic to the feminist cause, and then start them to look at what part of that cause is actually dogma now, which might have looked like being true back then, like the pay gap. It's been exposed in Australian courtrooms and everywhere else that the pay gap is fiction. Pay per hour has been equal in this country since 1980. Pay per hour is the only thing that's worth mentioning. Same job, same pay per hour, not same job, same pay, but man works 25 hours to the woman's 10. That's not fair. They should get paid the same. No one could make that argument reasonably. So there's lots of arguments that can ease people into challenging the dogma. My key one on that is false allegations are vanishingly rare, which is a cliched line that the police chiefs constantly come out with, which is part of that Duluth-style training they've received. They're supposed to say it.
Yep.
They know it's a lie. So to get into those people who are still promoting this, we need to be saying, look, this lie is going to be exposed soon. Do you really want to be on the wrong side of that? And I think we've got some people now realizing that it's bullshit. And particularly retired police officers, they're really good. They know, and they're not scared anymore because there's not career.
Right. They don't have to worry about they're not going to lose their promotion or their job for speaking out.
Exactly. So they're good allies is retired cops. So all of those things, because you may have seen on my profile, I've pinned the statistics we have in Britain. There's a survey done, not every year, but it's been regularly done since 1983. And they've got all the figures self-reported for the number of rapes there are of women in this country, in the UK. Every year they've got the figures there as a result of this survey, which is a big survey, massive sample size. So it's got the National Office of Statistics publish it with an A star as top grade statistics, really reliable. They also publish how many of those rape victims went to the police. And the first number is 98,000 for the last year recorded, which is 2021. The second number is 14,200, which is around 14%, 14.5%.
Right.
But then we find out that the police received 68,000 rape reports. And you think, hang on, 14,200 victims went to the police. Where did the others come from?
Yeah, the math isn't mathing for me. I'm like sitting here and I'm like, all right, I'm listening. I'm like, something ain't making sense here.
Yeah, something's, could it be that those people are liars? Not rape victims at all. And I think where the feminists got stuck, the decent feminists got stuck on this, was they said, women don't lie about rape. And what they meant was rape victims don't lie about rape. But women who haven't been raped, they lie about rape a lot.
And that's, you're touching on where I wanted to start going into with all of this stuff. So nice segue, even though we didn't plan it. again, going back to statistics, I think it was Mark Twain said there's statistics, there's damn statistics, all that whole thing. And
Lies, that
they're all
rises,
lies. Yeah. Um, when you look at those statistics and you start questioning them, as you just gave a brilliant example of, and when you start having conversations, I talk to politicians all the time about this stuff. You talk to feminists about it, they just glass over because it's just like for us, it's like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to them. As you're doing your research into this and talking with feminists or whomever, MPs in your case, congressmen in ours, what's been the response that you've seen when you address the statistical quandaries, let's call them?
As far as MPs go, none of them have picked up on this. They don't like it. I think in their heart of hearts, some of them probably do know the truth of what we're saying, but they know that they're not in any position to challenge the dogma, just like the police, who I mentioned earlier, that daren't go against the orders from above that say, believe all victims, we're going to take it to trial. And they go, hang on, 60 to 80% of these are lies. Why are we forced to doing this? So they know, but they bow down to the dogma, because that dogma, it's been going out now twice a week from the BBC, twice a week from the Guardian, every other news channel I can think of. They're constantly going on about rapists are around every corner. False allegations are vanishingly rare. We must support more victims. It's all, every week I see that going out. And it's like Goebbels said, if you tell a big lie often enough, everyone will believe it.
And it's been going on for decades now. I mean, over here, it's been since the early 70s. That's been, what's been pushed. And unfortunately, I think it hurts women as much as it hurts men, because they legitimately walk around living in fear all the time. Yeah. I have many women say to me, "You don't understand, Dan. You don't understand. We are in fear all the time." And I go, "No, I do understand that. My point to you is not that your fear is illegitimate. It is legitimate, but the basis of that fear isn't." Right. And, oh, by the way, men have the same fears. Right. So I've had little success getting them to kind of acknowledge it, because it's so ingrained, because it has been taught and it is drilled into everyone's brains by the media for decades now. And trying to combat that and have conversations about it is difficult. And that's why, when I saw that, let's kind of morph over to that post you put up, because I think I said it before and I'll say it again. That is the post of 2024, and we're already in January, because the reason is you were not negative at all, right? It was an honest, I think, reflection of yourself, trying to teach that to others. So for those that haven't seen it, and again, I will put a link in the show notes, and I'm ordering anyone listening to this to go read it, okay? Because
you will read this.
You will read it, and then the reason is, all kidding aside, is that it really gets to the heart and the crux of the matter, I think, on every level, with relationships, however you want to define that. I'm not talking just romantic, between men and women, and society. Right? Because even though you're talking to men primarily, I think it resonates with everyone. So why don't you talk about a little bit about what you had in there, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Okay, yeah. Well, I did write this piece, and I've not got it in front of me, so I'm kind of trying to piece it back together in my head again. But I wrote it from the perspective of why men should engage with men on this topic. Because women who I know who are sympathetic, who are men's rights advocates, they say, look, what's the best thing we can do with other women? And I think it was you said online, ask them for accountability. And I thought, right on, not easy, but we need people to start questioning and taking accountability for things that they have some degree of responsibility for. And with men, talking to men, there's a certain degree of ease. And then for me to say, I remember when I was very pro-feminist and very much sympathetic and also generally chivalrous by nature, and what that felt like, and when it started to disappear, and when I saw some facts that came out and that countered the dogma. So to ask men those questions, do you really believe this? Because this. And do you really believe this? Because this is what I found. And as I detail my story, I bring in the facts that actually changed my mind more than anything else, I think. But of course, once you're actually going through the mill of false accusations, it's too easy to go into all feminists must die. And I'm not into that level of hatred, and certainly not for individual women. I hate the ideology that is now extant that wasn't when I was, say, 40. I'm 67 now. And certainly one of the things I mention is that in the 1990s, I was rung up by a woman who worked for Women's Aid, which is kind of like the British biggest feminist support group, organization that supports battered wives, domestic violence issues. But they don't take in men, and they do now force all children over the age of 10 who are male out. They can't stay.
So it's 10 there, because generally over here it's 14. 13,
they've
14.
got it down to 10 now. Erin Pitsey will be. Erin's a great one.
I'm hoping to have Erin on as a guest very soon. Actually, I've already reached out to her.
Yeah, she's not very well.
I know. That's why I want to get her on, because she's actually one of my heroes, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and a lot of us in the men's rights group would say the same. But that organization, then there was one woman where I was a place called Torvine, which is like a county, a small county, 86,000 population. And she told me that they were getting an average of 2 calls a week from men who were violently abused by their partners, women partners. And she wanted to help, but she said, I can't help them here. What can you do? Can you help? Can you create a group or something? And I'll help you set it up, because I know about setting up support groups. And bless her heart, she did. She helped me, and we set up this group. And at the same time, I had a guy come through the door who had a blood-stained knee coming through his jeans. I could see the blood on his jeans. And I said, what happened to you? And he said, oh, I might as well tell you the truth, I guess. I've kept it quiet for way too long. My wife, she stabbed me. And it's not the first time. And so I got his story out of him in the end. And that he was one of the key founders of that group. Right off the bat, 6'2", big guy, wife 5'7", not that strong, but he just sat and taken it and stabbed, steam iron in the face, frying pan over the back of the head, loads of stab wounds and hammers and other things. And the number of people who told me their story, we didn't get that many come through the door, and I think you probably know why.
Yep. Yep.
It's not easy to get men to admit to something that's now not so shameful for women as it used to be, but it's still much more shameful for men, I think. And to admit to being violently attacked, to admit to being a victim of a woman is not good for men psychologically. They don't like it.
Yeah, it's, again, I ran a group 20 odd years ago. It started getting known. It was interesting that same experience that you had, it was very small at first. But as the guys came in and started sharing their stories and seeing the benefits of doing so for themselves, they started talking to their friends a little bit. Because one of the things I always, not preached, but threw out there was to say, look, guys, if we want to change this, we got to start telling our stories, as painful as that is. Because when I share my story, I catch hell, right? Oh, you're lying, or you deserved it, or whatever, I understand, gentlemen, that we need to share these stories so that people understand it does happen to us and takes that stigma away. And I think what happened is as the guys got more comfortable with it, they started talking to their friends, and we grew. I mean, on an average week, anywhere from 12 to 15 was the average in the group, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to, say, the
That's to
women's
me.
groups, but it's a huge number compared to most.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the issues that we as men need to do, and you're doing it and I'm doing it, is speak out about this stuff and let guys know it's okay to talk. I understand why you're not. We're not faulting you for it. I never would hold that against a guy.
Yeah.
But if you want to get help, and more importantly, if you want to take care of yourself, you need to start talking. And then people like you, me, and others will back you up. You know, it's interesting because, like you know, I grew up in the 70s. We talked a little bit off air about this. I believe in a lot of the initial aspects of that wave of feminism.
Yeah.
There were inequalities that needed to be addressed. To this day, I still say that. There are still some that I would say need to be addressed. But it's gone away from that, let's call it 70s feminism, into basically a gender war. You know, it's you know, we got this much, well, we want it all now, and in order to get it all, we have to destroy men, and that's really what's happening. I want to kind of go through your journey of change. I was trying to think of a good word to
Well,
use.
I was just thinking about the change that happened, because then that woman who came to the group and helped set it up and so on, if I went back to Women's Aid in Torvine today and said, I would like your assistance, please, in her,
No, you won't get any.
There's no way I'd get any support from them.
Right.
And yet I remember working with Women's Aid as a larger group, doing creches against sexism. It was all group of men, we got toys donated to us by the 100. And we ran these creches whilst the women were having their Women's Aid conferences. The fact that they actually thought that was a good idea tells you how different that time was. Because you can imagine now, yes, let's get a bunch of men's rights activists to look after our children when we have our women's conferences.
That would be an interesting conversation, wouldn't it? Oh my.
Doesn't it just jump out at you as fantasy land?
Yeah, really. So, but
more,
go ahead.
But more on my story. I
Please.
just want to get back to what we were talking about with men and their not wanting to come forward and what happened.
Sure.
If you see in the film a guy called Spencer, who very quickly bursts into tears in the film, he was very reluctant to come after he'd already arranged to. He was havering and just not, I don't think I can do it. I don't think, And when he came, he was really nervous and upset, and I could tell he was traumatized. And I said, look, you don't have to go through with this. It's fine. But let's just talk and see how you feel after about 10 minutes. And if you don't like it, we'll turn the camera off and have a cup of tea. And he started, and it flowed. His is the longest single person raw file that we've got on my YouTube channel, because he did go into a lot of detail. But what was so remarkable was after he'd been in buckets of tears talking to camera, when we came to go, he was a completely different person. His shoulders were up. Mm-hmm. He lost all this weight, mental weight, and his voice was clearer and it had more intonation. Every clue could tell you that this guy had been through a transformation from telling his story and being heard. And that helped me feel whatever we're doing, it's worthwhile. It just is worthwhile to do this thing. And most of the people who were in the film, they also gave money to help it make it. So sorry, going back to your point, Dan, but I wanted to clock.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, Patrick, because it's an important thing that you just said. The most important thing, I think, of this whole show so far. It gets the weight off of you just sharing your story. If you're listening to this show as a man and you're going through whatever false allegation, you're being domestically abused, whatever, sharing your story, and I understand it's difficult. I believe me, we both do. Though the sense of relief you will get from it, whether you tell it to someone privately, you're a good, I'll use the British term, mate or friend here, whether it's a professional, a psychologist, psychiatrist, whether it's someone like Patrick or myself, who, I'm a trained peer counselor. I haven't done it in a while, but getting it out there and getting it off your chest can literally change your life like that. I've experienced it. I personally experienced the same thing. When I finally told my story, it was like, a ton of weight came off of me. So I wanted to thank you for saying that and getting to that, because it's so important. Yeah. Having said that, let's get back to what you were saying. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kind of throw you off track there.
What were we on before? I've lost it again now. Excuse me. No. I'm
well, we'll just kind of dive back in. So, we were talking about just in general, the transformation from being a male feminist over, okay. and you're in that whole conversation, because I think this is an important part that men need to understand also, is that, and I want to lay the groundwork for you, we're not anti-women. We support women, but in your post, you were raising some pretty interesting points, and I want to kind of dive into that in the sense that, not the specific individuals, although we can do that if you want, but like, what was your goal? Like, you're trying to reach these men. What was the goal in doing so, and what's been the response to that? I guess that's where I want to go next.
Well, the response has been fairly muted. There's not been a huge number of people that have come back to me, and intriguingly, quite often when I do make posts on a similar vein, I get a lot of flack back.
Oh yeah, you'll catch hell.
I mean, for example, I did a post about, following on from Matt Walsh saying that there are worse things than rape, such as being falsely accused, and in terms of how it wrecks a man's life so completely, devastation. And whilst I didn't want to make out that rape is nothing, absolutely, I wanted to say, okay, so how big is that for women? And I sought out some women who'd been both places. And I know a woman called Felicity, who I've now filmed an interview with, who was raped when she was first married, and who's also now with her second husband, been through him being falsely accused. Mm-hmm. And she said the falsely accused stuff has been more traumatic than the rape was.
I've heard similar stories, right?
But it needed to come from a woman,
yes,
for me to be able to repeat it.
Right.
I found 3 women immediately. I posted that, it came back, and I said, okay, so we've got something to go on here to say, maybe sometimes obviously some rapes can be way worse mm-hmm. than others. Don't want to make that.
We're not trying to minimize that at all.
I'm not trying to minimize it, but I'm saying this is how bad it can be. And yet people keep diminishing it and knocking it back and saying, no, it doesn't happen. Or if it does, it's irrelevant, minor. So here we've got women rape victims saying, no, it isn't minor. And so I posted that about the 3 women, and J.K. Rowling quote hated it.
Yes,
I had a lovely pile in. I had a pile on. And but interestingly, that got 2 more women come to me and say, actually, yes, me too, I agree. So J.K. Rowling, probably you didn't have the effect that you thought you did.
Yeah, I might have responded to her on, I call it Twitter still, X, and pointed out a few, let's call them flaws in her argument. It's interesting. A point that you're raising here, Patrick, is, when you're talking about men's issues, or you're talking about things like false allegations, there are a lot of women that support men. And I think, we were talking about earlier about what men need to do. Again, women, share your stories of what you're seeing, right? If your husband's been falsely accused, talk about how it affects you as well. Because, again, this stuff gets lost. The more we tell these stories from all perspectives, the better off everyone is. It benefits women as much as it does men.
Oh, and there's a friend of mine called Emma Wells who came to my party, and has been. We filmed with her up in Lancashire. She's formed a group called Unseen Victims because she campaigned hard on behalf of her boyfriend, who turned out to be guilty of rape. But she got the flack as the girlfriend in a way that was really unfair. Police were, publicizing her as in some way guilty by association. And she visited him in prison, and she discovered a lot of other women visiting men in prison, some of whom were maintaining innocence and some of whom were definitely guilty. But what the women have in common was that their lives were trashed for being loyal to their man.
Mm-hmm.
And, what they'd been through with the trials and everything else and the support that they'd given, they found the system was really tough on them too, not just by association. It was tough on them as individuals. And so she's formed a group called Unseen Victims, which you can find on Twitter, as I also sometimes call it still.
It will forever be Twitter to me. I'm never changing. Yeah. Sorry, Elon.
The thing is, I say X sometimes online because it saves a lot of syllables.
True.
But and she's told me, and I know of several women who will support the idea that actually for every falsely accused man, of which we know there were probably in Britain about 45 to 50,000 in the last 2 years, there is also the same number of women and probably a whole load of children of those people as well.
Yeah, that's what people forget is if the man's accused, if he's got a daughter, his sister, his wife or significant other, mother, all of them are affected.
Yeah.
It's not just affecting the man, it's affecting everyone around him. Sons, daughters, all of that. And that's why I hate that it's a gender issue, because I understand why it needs to be in a manner of speaking, but it shouldn't be, right? It's same thing with rape, by the way, right? We talk about it. I was raped at 13 by a 35-year-old woman. But under the law in some countries, and I think the UK is one of them, I wasn't raped because a man cannot be raped.
That's the way the law is written.
Yeah.
I have a much more controversial view, which is I say there should be no law of rape.
Ooh, interesting. Can we explore that? Because we're going to catch hell. I already know that, but go ahead.
You know the origin of the crime of rape, and this is probably the same because it happened in Britain, and it's a precedent set law that differentiates it from burglary. Is significant. Burglary is significant penetration of a building in order to steal or rape. Now, it's very clear in the way the law is set out that rape is therefore seen as a property law. And what it means is that it's the man's property, that woman, either their daughter or their wife, that's been stolen, damaged if they're raped. And someone breaking in, that's burglary. If they've done that or stolen something. So you can see how the two are brought together there. Rape and theft in someone's house is burglary.
Okay.
And including the fact that now burglary has become a kind of slang word for rape in British gay slang. It's there, I must have you by burglary.
I had never heard that one before, so you're
it's in a famous movie with Nail and I.
Wow.
But the point is that the word has become so emotionally charged now. When you think about it, it doesn't help anybody. What's happening is sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And there are degrees of sexual assault. We can all know that, Mm-hmm. If I grab a woman on the tube and give her a big kiss on the cheek, that technically now would be sexual assault. It's not quite the same as what we call rape, is it?
Right. Different degrees.
Every degree, right up to the most severe sort of gang rape with humiliation and all sorts, which would give you your maximum sentence, the maximum that you could now get for rape, that would cop it, but it would still be called sexual assault. Then you've got the courts dealing with sexual assault and degrees like actual bodily harm, grievous bodily harm, all those different degrees you can have of that assault, if you like. The emotional attachment to the word would cease to be in the legal case. And I think that would actually mean jurors would be more inclined to find a nasty sexual assaulter guilty than they would if the only charge they've got is rape.
Wow, this is
a possibility there. Yeah. And it would take out this male-female gender split, because sexual assault is sexual assault. It doesn't, if it used to be fairly recently that rape had to be with a penis. Quite recently.
In some countries, it still is.
Yeah. And tell me, in that gang rape situation where strangers with, pissing on someone and drugging them or whatever, is it really the most important thing that it was a penis rather than a broom handle?
Yeah, why does it matter?
Yeah. The law.
Right.
That's what changes the law from something not so major to something major. Because to me, that's obvious bullshit.
Right.
It's got to be that the victim, whoever the victim is, the damage done to them is where the degree comes. Not some concept that we have that is outdated and based on thieving a woman from their man's property, which is where it comes from.
I'm going to blow your mind, Patrick. You ready? Are you sitting down for this?
Yeah, what?
That argument you just made is very close to an argument a feminist made to me.
Oh, really?
To argue. So the point I was making is that men can be raped. And she said, no, men can be sexually assaulted. And it was, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it was not verbatim what you said, but it was very close to it. So for all of you listening going apoplectic right now, I've heard the same from a pretty radical feminist who argues that, the context being it doesn't necessarily have to be penile insertion, right? And it's just, I was like, when you were talking, I was like shaking my head going, I've already heard this, but from someone who's the opposite.
Do you think she'd be ready to give up that rape happens to women as well?
No, that's the difference. That would be the difference. But
because that would be equality, wouldn't it? That would be equality.
I wish I could get the two of you on together, because I would just introduce you and step back, and I wouldn't have to say a word for about 5 hours. But it was,
fireworks go.
Yeah, she wouldn't agree with you in the sense take away the term rape or the charge rape. But in a sense, she would agree with you, right? It would be she just couldn't make the leap to take it away.
It's the only logical conclusion if what you're seeking is equality. That's my point. If you want equality, and I still see feminists saying that's what they want, and I constantly then post my picture of where patriarchy is and the lack of equality in it for men. It's, if you want equality, this would be a really good way of getting equality in this law and effectively starting to challenge probably the idea of preventing it, because you'd actually then be looking at both genders seeking to prevent sexual assault. And there'd be an honesty about it that at the moment is just impossible. No man thinks he's a rapist, even the rapists. They don't think. So if you're constantly hammering on about that's the problem and what we've got to solve, loads of men are going to turn off straight away. And quite a lot of women as well will turn off straight away, because the not thinking it applies to them rule works as well. But if it's sexual assault that you're talking about always, not all the time, that doesn't get people turned off, because they actually think, well, maybe what I did, with that woman when she was a bit drunk and I went a bit far, that's not good. You might get some of those people on board, possibly. But not as long as everything is rape. Is always...
You're taking out the emotional context of the term, exactly. Is your point, right? Is we're not saying we're trying to dismiss any of that stuff from happening. We're just saying, let's take the emotion out of it and address the real issue. You got me thinking, my friend. I have to tell you, we weren't planning on going here, but that's
I'm pretty sure you'd get more convictions, more guilty people in jail.
If you put yourself as a juror sitting there and, in theory, in the States anyway, you're supposed to be logical and take your emotions out. Of course, none of that ever happens, but I do think it would make me think if I'm sitting on a jury. You got my wheel spinning right now. That's why I'm like sounding like an idiot too, but because I do see your point, right?
Yeah.
I do see it, and I'm like, he's got something here.
It won't happen, by the way.
Oh, never in a million years, not a chance. No. But again, that's the goal of what we're trying to do, is have conversations and open up dialogue about this stuff, because you're not trying to take anything away from the victims. You're trying to help them. Actual victims. So. But people will miss that. When I first
came up with this idea, it was before my own false allegations. It was long before then. It was back in the time in the 1990s when I was doing the men's support group and working closely with Women's Aid. It was then that I put forward the argument, and I put it formally to the Law Commission, which is a thing you can go through. You fill in a long form about why you want to change a certain law and so on, and they have little hearings for it. And of course they dismissed it, because the legal people are as hooked on the idea of rape as the feminists are. It's all deeply embedded in their psyche, and they're attached to the emotional side. They don't want to eliminate the emotional side, even though they're lawyers, and they shouldn't.
Yeah, it's so ingrained, I guess is the way we want to put it, that the system is reluctant to change, right? It's, and it gets in its own way when it needs to change. I think that's a fair statement that no one would disagree with. But, you come at it from a logical perspective, what you're saying. Again, I'm sitting, you've got my brain just going right now. So,
well, I'm glad.
Golf clap to you, which is my highest standard, by the way, that I can give someone. Kind of, if I can, we could go back to the post you made. One of the things that you brought up, it's something that I don't like, which is the term simp. And I wanted to kind of talk to you about it, right? Because you say in that post, and I forget exactly what it is, but you say, I was a simp, right? And the reason I wanted to bring it up with you is because I think it would be an interesting piece to get your thoughts on. The reason I don't like it is I think it's not fair to the men that we would call that name, in the sense that I've worked with many guys like that, right, who were quote unquote simps, right? And when I talk with those guys, what I find very, almost not universal, but I would say 85 to 90% of them are men who were raised by single mothers and dad wasn't present very much. And that's why I have a problem with the sense of labeling it. Now, does that mean I don't throw it at somebody? They come at me hard enough, I might, but because sometimes you got to fight fire with fire, as you know. But I wanted to get your perspective on that belief that I have, that it's not fair to them. And more importantly, here's the key part, that we as men need to do what you did in your post, which is sit down with them, have a conversation, and help them, because they've never had a man do that. There's never been a man in their life. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I used it almost in inverted commas, if you remember.
I did. I remember that. Yep.
Because I was saying, dear feminist men or simps.
Yes.
We need to talk. And I was saying we in the sense that this is who I am too. And I don't like the phrase, but I'm using it because it's thrown around so much.
Right.
And so I'm trying to hook in those people who maybe thrown the phrase around, as well as those who feel that maybe it's been attached to them, either fairly or unfairly. And also men who think that chivalry is, always a good thing in all circumstances. And I would say that, holding a door open for someone when they're having any kind of trouble walking with some baggage or whatever, that's chivalry. Doesn't have to be a woman.
Exactly.
I will hold the door open for people who I think might benefit from that. And I don't want to stop that happening. I want to stop the obsequious and blindness to dogma that has got people going down narrow avenues of belief that are just myths, and they're doing themselves down by going that way.
Hmm.
So that's my big aim, and I think that a lot of women are discovering they don't like the avenues they've created. A lot of the feminists have created these. Even they are finding it unattractive because they would really rather have men who were confident and up and about, but did say no and did say, I disagree with you. But at the moment, they're too hooked into saying, you're mansplaining.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
you know, yeah, I've seen you put your fingers in the light bulb. I'm explaining to you why that might kill you. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I talk with women all the time. I know, shocking to some of my listeners, but I do, because I get women that reach out to me on a daily basis, and one of the things that they'll say to me is, "Don't these guys that I call them pander bears that pander to us, that think that that's what we want, we're repulsed by that." And we're never going to be attracted to them because they don't have as one recently said to me, they don't have a backbone. They're just going to give me whatever I want. That's not what I want, right? It's pandering. That's why, hence the name Pander Bears. But it's interesting that like the dynamics you talk about, opening a door. That's become. I've gotten screamed at. I don't know how many times for holding a door open for a woman. To the point now, I sometimes don't do it because I don't want to hear it anymore. But in the reality, it's just decency to hold it for anyone, whether it's a man, a woman, one of the blue people from Avatar. I don't care. We've lost that as a society. And I think that goes to what you were just talking about. That's what women are starting to wake up to, is that in standing up for their rights, they've created a dynamic that is backfiring on them. Wouldn't you agree?
I would, and I don't want to see men all going the way of Andrew Tate and saying, "Yeah, we
Oh,
must be
no.
macho and strong, and ha ha, look at how brilliant I am," and all. No, 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 it's just not my thing at all.
Nor
Um,
mine, by the way.
yeah, no, I guessed that.
Mm-hmm.
We've both been involved in counselling, and we've both seen the dirty sides of men faking strength and covering up weakness, and it's better not to do that. So I think, yeah, it is a shame, and I see women falling for Andrew Tate, for God's sakes, and you just think, oh no, come on, come halfway with us,
Mm-hmm.
have a conversation. And nearly all the good women on Twitter that I relate to, who are men's rights orientated, most of them are very strongly women's rights too. They're not they're not saying we hate all women. That would be ridiculous. So yeah, it's a kind of hitting that balance. And I think when I talk about simps, I need to talk with you. I want to talk with you about how my following feminism down the rabbit hole was the wrong rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
There are foxes down there. Let's not go there. Um, let's get out in the open air where we have good free debate and we have honest conversations about who can be advantaged by coming together and doing things. I have a great relationship with my wife. You know, we know that we have certain roles that we'd rather not do and certain roles we would rather do, and we've hit the right compromise. So I actually do 99% of the cooking. She does 99% of the cleaning. So cliche, whatever, that's how we've settled it. I say everyone else should settle things their way, not by cliche or stereotype, but by negotiation. And sometimes we switch roles for things and do some fun things that just to see what would happen. Um,
Well,
but
your point right there, it comes down to communication, right? And
yeah,
every relationship, whether it's romantic, work, anything, friendship, whatever, is about communication ultimately. So, your point is spot on, and it's one that's completely lost, I think, in today's society, which is roles are roles, but they don't have to apply to you. You need to sit down, as in your case, a couple, you and your wife sit down. All right, well, I prefer to cook. You prefer to clean. You do this, I'll do that. Negotiate it out. Feminists would have a cow that your wife's doing 99% of the cleaning, right? And they would say, you can't possibly be doing 99% of the cooking because men don't know how to cook. Like, they literally can't feed themselves.
Yeah.
When you have those extremist points, and I try and illustrate that with some of my videos, they think that I hate women because I'll take what women are saying and I call my, give and take, counterpoints with them. But what I'm trying to illustrate is ultimately that it's a fallacy to think these things, right? It's not reality in the real world. There's going to be give and take in any healthy relationship. And I say kudos to you for doing 99% of the cooking. I prefer to cook too.
Yeah, I love to cook, so it's easy for me. And
Two,
it's a cyclical task. So this is the thing where whole feminism used to go on about women's tasks, the stereotypes were cyclical and not valued, whereas men used to do the creative and the building and the solid things that were valued. And I could see that argument back then, but I'm saying, well, I'm doing the cooking, that's cyclical. And I do some cleaning. I'm not a slob. I've looked after myself on my own plenty of times. It's just the way our lives have developed. We've negotiated it this way because it just suits us. And if everybody would not be so scared of doing roles that might seem stereotyped, but as long as you've consciously chosen them, that's not a problem. It's when you feel forced into a role that's something wrong going on. If you feel forced into a role, you're probably not talking to someone properly. You don't have to be forced into a role. No one does. And I quit a marriage because I was being forced into a role of enabling an alcoholic.
mm-hmm.
And I couldn't take it anymore because I wasn't relating to. Come 7 o'clock, I couldn't communicate with my wife.
Right.
So it was the drink or me, and she chose the drink. But yeah, you can leave, and I did leave. That's the way it goes.
I mean, ultimately, it comes down to what is the best dynamic for that particular relationship. And it may be, like to your point, you need to end it, but we make such a big deal out of what I consider relatively minor things. Cooking dinner, 15, 20 minutes, doing the laundry. And all of my marriages, I've done most of the washing and drying. What I don't do is the folding. Because one, I freely admit I suck at it, okay? I'm horrible at it. I can do it, but it doesn't look good, So you work those compromises. And, my second wife and we had 6 kids. I was doing laundry literally every single day. To be honest with you, there were times the washer and dryer were going for days on end. But I never liked folding laundry, so we worked it out. Some of it we verbalized. Some of it just naturally happened. But yet, it goes to the point of we have these, it's got to be exactly this way. In all their fighting to do away with roles, they create roles, I guess is my point with it all.
That's a very good point. That's it.
And it doesn't need to be that way.
Go with the role you feel happy with, and don't label it.
It's amazing, though, that we want to stick that label on it, So, Patrick, we got a couple more minutes before we have to wrap things up. One final point I want to make on your post, which is, again, it was brilliant. And I'm not saying that because he's sitting in front of me on a screen right now. I truly believe this. And I have reposted it on X. I probably can't post it anywhere else because it'll get taken down. But one final point I want to get from it is, I've talked about it with certain people, and it's resonated with them. Some of my guys that I coach individually, I've sent it to them. I've said, go read this and see how do you feel afterwards, right? I want you to know it has resonated with them. It wasn't just me.
That's good.
They see themselves. They see, it may not be exactly their viewpoint or whatever, but they see themselves in it. and like you said, you haven't had much feedback, but the feedback that you've gotten from guys, are you hearing the same thing?
I've had from guys who I already vaguely knew online. I've had people saying, yeah, that resonated with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then others who are some of them are ahead of me down this path, or never were uh, feminist inclined themselves, say, oh God, I hope this works. I hope you get some of these guys on board, off that raft they're on, that sinking ship they're on. And I was thinking, well, maybe it will, but I think it's going to be posted on a website called False Allegations Watch.
Oh, okay. Oh, I know that website. I've had Sean on.
And I've yeah, Sean is good friend now,
Oh,
and
okay. I didn't.
I've
Sean
had
was actually on the show about
yeah,
3-4 months ago.
but well, we're a small group in some ways, but
Yeah,
hopefully getting bigger.
yeah.
But yeah, he's posted a couple of my articles on there. I've had a couple of articles on there before, and yeah, he's putting that one up, I think. So we'll see what happens. He liked it a lot, obviously.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, it is so well done. It was brilliant because I think it it addresses a difficult topic, but it's done the right way, and kudos to you for doing that. That's
Well, thank you very much, Dan.
any final thoughts for the audience?
Well, I mean, I'm guessing your audience includes a lot of men who are already where we're at,
Mm-hmm.
and they're confirming things and finding out more detail. And I would say to them, that's great, do more. And when it comes to persuading people who are borderline, then yes, please do use my article if you think in the slightest way it will help. It's quite a short read. I mean, I did it in 8 posts on Twitter, I think, because of the figure limit, but I can give you it in text form so you can have it to distribute in any way you want, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bottom line for me is always stay loving, always try and stay kind to the real people in your life, and you will start to see the benefits of going through pains in order to hit truth. And when the truth starts to make you feel some sense of reward, the pains just fade away and they become things that you knew you had to go through. And it's like, as well as I do, confrontation is something you can't avoid. So if you spend your life trying to avoid it, you're just creating more pain for yourself. So you have to do confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
And when you confront in a kind way, it's all about asking questions and giving avenues to explore. And that's what I would want people to look at, is which dogma do you hold to that you suddenly might think, because of something you've read or seen on channels like this, do you think actually there's something here that I need to question? I've been following this person and something about something they've said has made me think, no, they're not right on that. What's their dogma? What's the dogma that people are following? And question it, because as soon as you do start questioning it, certain towers come tumbling down, and this whole false allegation shtick, that's got to come tumbling down, because eventually there'll be so many falsely accused people that even the judges will start to say, enough is enough. This is crazy. I've been falsely accused too, sort of thing.
Yeah, that a lot of them will face the false allegation down the road themselves, and I actually
Yeah.
do think we've already reached the tipping point on it with the false allegations. I see from where we were like a year ago this time to where we are now with the coverage. That speaks volumes, and it's the work that you're doing. Again, go watch We Believe You. I'll link it in the show notes, because I will get through the rest of it. I had to stop because it was that powerful, and if it's affecting me, it's going to affect everyone, because I can be pretty objective and take myself out of the emotion. As my divorce attorney said, you're like the Terminator. You have no feelings whatsoever. It's that powerful, and it resonates in a way with me personally. It resonated in a way as someone who's never been falsely accused that I can't even describe at this point. I mean, that's how powerful it is. And
I did get a lot of very good feedback from the whole conference of the falsely accused, not surprisingly, but then 3 or 4 of them came up to me afterwards and said, look, I didn't come up to you earlier because I was crying too much.
There you go. There you go. It does resonate. Patrick, how can people follow you on Twitter or X?
I am Pat of Minch, M-I-N-C-H, Pat of Minch, with the @ of course. And my YouTube channel is under my own name. It's Patrick C. Graham, and I've linked to it in the Twitter bio. So if you can get on Twitter, you'll get to the rest of me as well.
Well, I'll put links to all of them. And actually, when you did the little thing with your finger, it's beautiful because I'll just put the Twitter handle right underneath your finger. It's like we planned it, you know.
It's almost like I'm used to doing that. Yeah.
It's you know, great minds, I guess. I want to thank you, my friend, for coming on, and I do consider you a friend now. We only just started talking a few days ago, really. But it was such a powerful piece that you wrote. And then I went down your rabbit hole and started watching what you had posted and videos and stuff like that. And that's why I wanted to have you on. And I encourage everyone to go follow Patrick and really watch, not just, We Believe You, but also there's a post that he has, and I'll link that also, where you did your speech at that conference, because it will resonate with everyone. Again, thank you, my friend, for coming on, and I want to have you on again down the road if I can.
Absolutely. No problem at all, Dan. Enjoyed it.
All right. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up. What a powerful show, right? Again, one of the goals of this channel is to educate men and women and society on what men have to deal with. We covered a wide range of topics here today, from false allegations to trying to change the mindset of men who maybe struggling with some things. That's what we're trying to do. And you can help me to help you by doing the stuff that we all talk about. Give me that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. The podcast comes out every Sunday at 11. If you hit the notification bell, you'll get notified once I post them. You can join my private membership group. I do separate videos on that every week where I talk about different topics. Lots of fun stuff, but you got to be in it to win it, as they say in our lotteries over here. So give me that subscribe, and do me one other favor. Share this with as many people as you can, because one of the issues that we have, those of us that speak out on the issues men and boys face, is we get throttled. We get throttled in the real world by the media, and we get throttled by social media. So your sharing it can help us defeat the algorithm, as I like to put it. All right. On that note, we're going to say, have a great week, and I'll see you next time on Men Need to Be Heard.